The little girl had ignored every billionaire in the room, every teacher, every doctor, and every man her mother had ever trusted. Then, in front of 300 stunned guests, she walked straight past them, wrapped both arms around the janitor's waist, and whispered the one word that made her mother's blood run cold: Dad. What the billionaire CEO didn't know was that the quiet man holding her daughter had once carried wounded soldiers through enemy fire as a Navy SEAL, and he had buried that entire life so deeply that he never expected anyone to discover it again. If you believe kindness can heal what money cannot, forgiveness can change a life, hope can survive the darkest moments, and everyone deserves a second chance, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel and become part of our community. The man standing in the middle of the marble atrium was named Everett Callahan, a 42-year-old janitor who had spent the past 14 months cleaning the headquarters of a technology empire worth billions. He was the kind of employee most executives passed without noticing. He wore a plain gray uniform, kept his head down, arrived early, and never complained when someone left coffee stains on freshly polished floors. Yet there was something about Everett that never quite fit the role. His movements were too precise. He noticed exits without appearing to look for them. He could hear a dropped object from across a crowded room. When a glass panel shattered one afternoon, he had instinctively moved between the sound and a group of children before anyone else understood what had happened. Most people thought he was simply unusually alert. Nobody knew why. The owner of the building, Celeste Whitmore, was 38, fiercely intelligent, relentlessly driven, and known throughout the business world as the CEO who could turn struggling companies into billion-dollar successes. Her name appeared on magazine covers and financial broadcasts, but behind the polished image was a mother who carried one private fear that money had never been able to solve. Her 8-year-old daughter, Marlowe, had become increasingly withdrawn after losing her father several years earlier. She rarely trusted strangers, avoided crowded gatherings, and refused every attempt by therapists and specialists to make her feel comfortable around new people. Celeste had spent years trying to protect her daughter from grief, only to discover that protection sometimes became another kind of prison. Marlowe first noticed Everett because he treated her differently. He never asked her why she was quiet. He never told her to smile. He never bent down and forced cheerful questions upon her. Instead, whenever he saw her sitting alone in the employee garden during daytime hours, he would quietly leave a small paper animal beside her. One day it was a folded fox. Another day it was a tiny crane. Eventually Marlowe began leaving folded animals for him in return. Their friendship grew without either of them needing to explain it. Everett understood something Celeste had forgotten. Sometimes a hurting child does not need to be fixed. Sometimes she simply needs someone willing to sit beside her without demanding that she become happy. Celeste initially noticed the friendship with suspicion. She had spent years believing that everyone wanted something from her. Employees wanted promotions, investors wanted returns, social acquaintances wanted connections, and men who approached her often seemed fascinated by her wealth before they knew anything about her. When she discovered that her daughter had been spending time with the janitor, she confronted the situation carefully. Everett remained respectful and never crossed a boundary. He explained that Marlowe sometimes came to the garden because it was quiet, and he stayed nearby because he wanted to make sure she was safe. Celeste expected defensiveness. Instead, she saw humility. For the first time in years, someone around her seemed completely uninterested in her money. The turning point came during the company's annual family charity luncheon, held in the enormous sunlit atrium. Celeste had invited executives, investors, employees, and their families. She wanted the event to remind everyone that the company was more than numbers on a screen. But Marlowe became overwhelmed by the crowd. She slipped away from her mother and walked toward the far end of the atrium, where Everett was cleaning a small spill near the windows. Nobody expected what happened next. Marlowe ran to him, buried her face against his uniform, and held him as tightly as she could. When Celeste reached them, she saw her daughter looking up at Everett with tears in her eyes and calling him Dad. The room seemed to freeze. Celeste felt anger first, then fear, then something much more painful. She had never heard Marlowe call another man that word. Everett looked as stunned as everyone else. He immediately knelt beside the girl and gently explained that he was not her father, but he would always be someone who cared about her. Marlowe began crying, not because he had rejected her, but because she had finally found someone who made her feel safe enough to say what she had been carrying inside. Celeste realized that her daughter was not replacing her father. She was expressing the kind of protection and trust she had desperately missed. But Celeste could not ignore the questions surrounding Everett anymore. A background check had shown almost nothing. His employment history before becoming a janitor was strangely incomplete. There were no normal college records, no ordinary corporate positions, and no detailed history explaining the years between his early 20s and his arrival at the company. When Celeste's security director quietly investigated further, he discovered a sealed military record connected to a former Navy SEAL named Everett Callahan. Celeste confronted him privately during the afternoon in her office. Everett did not deny it. He admitted that he had served in the SEALs and had been part of missions he did not discuss. He had received commendations, but the honors meant little to him compared with the people he had lost. Years earlier, his team had been ambushed during an overseas operation. Everett survived, but several men he considered brothers did not. After returning home, he struggled with survivor's guilt and found that ordinary life felt unbearably loud. He walked away from the military, changed his career path, and chose quiet work because he wanted to live a life where protecting someone meant helping them feel safe rather than preparing for danger. Celeste was shocked, but what unsettled her most was not the military history. It was the reason Everett had never told anyone. He did not want admiration. He did not want sympathy. He did not want his past to become a weapon that opened doors for him. He simply wanted to be useful. Celeste began to see the man beneath the uniform differently. She also began to understand why Marlowe trusted him. Everett had the rare ability to recognize fear without making a frightened person feel weak. Still, their growing connection created conflict. One of Celeste's senior executives, Grant Mercer, believed Everett was manipulating the family. Grant had spent years trying to become one of Celeste's closest advisors and had quietly convinced himself that he belonged beside her. He planted doubts by suggesting that Everett had deliberately approached Marlowe because he knew her mother was wealthy. Celeste wanted to dismiss the accusation, but fear made her hesitate. Her greatest weakness had always been the belief that losing control meant losing everything. Then came the moment that changed everything. During a daytime corporate event at a nearby community center, a heavy display structure suddenly collapsed after a faulty support gave way. People screamed and rushed toward the exits. Before security could react, Everett moved through the chaos with startling speed. He pulled one child away from falling debris, helped an injured employee to safety, and directed frightened families toward the safest exit. His actions were calm, controlled, and unmistakably trained. He never sought attention afterward. He simply returned to helping people. But Marlowe had seen him disappear beneath the debris to rescue another little girl who was trapped behind a fallen panel. When Everett emerged carrying the child, Marlowe ran to him with tears streaming down her face. Celeste followed and finally understood what her daughter had seen in him all along. It was not a fantasy. It was not manipulation. It was safety. Later that afternoon, Celeste discovered the truth about Grant. He had deliberately tampered with internal security reports to make Everett appear suspicious because he wanted Celeste to remove him from the company and from Marlowe's life. Grant had also been secretly redirecting corporate funds into accounts connected to a business he controlled. The investigation revealed that Everett had actually noticed unusual security activity weeks earlier but had said nothing because he did not want to interfere in Celeste's professional decisions. Celeste was devastated by the betrayal. She had spent years trusting people who knew how to speak the language of wealth, while distrusting the one man who never asked her for anything. She dismissed Grant, cooperated with the investigation, and accepted responsibility for allowing ambition and fear to blind her judgment. But Everett was not ready to become part of a billionaire family simply because Celeste had finally understood him. He explained that Marlowe deserved stability, and Celeste deserved someone who would never use her vulnerability against her. He also admitted that he was afraid. He had spent years building a quiet life because he believed his past made him dangerous to anyone who became too close. Loving people had always meant giving fate something else to take away. Celeste did something she had almost never done. She stopped trying to control the outcome. Instead of promising him money, protection, or a future, she promised him honesty. She told him that she did not need a hero and Marlowe did not need a replacement father. They needed someone real. Someone who could admit when he was afraid. Someone who could stay when life became difficult. For the first time, Everett allowed himself to believe that perhaps his life did not have to end with the memories of the men he had lost. Perhaps honoring them did not mean living alone forever. Perhaps surviving was not a punishment. Perhaps it was an opportunity to give another family the safety he had once fought so hard to protect. Months passed, and the relationship changed slowly rather than magically. Celeste learned to put down her phone during breakfast. Marlowe learned that grief could coexist with happiness. Everett began volunteering with veterans and teaching basic safety skills at local schools. He eventually left his janitorial position, not because he was ashamed of it, but because he had discovered a new purpose: helping former service members rebuild ordinary lives after extraordinary experiences. One bright afternoon, Celeste and Marlowe visited him at a community center where he was helping young veterans prepare for civilian careers. Marlowe carried a folded paper animal in her hand. She gave it to Everett, and when he opened it, he found a tiny paper family holding hands beneath a crooked sun. There were 3 figures, not because she had forgotten her father, but because she had learned that love could make room for new people without erasing the old ones. Celeste watched Everett unfold the little paper family and wipe a tear from his eye. She understood then that the greatest thing he had ever done was not surviving a dangerous mission, rescuing a child, or protecting her daughter. It was allowing himself to be loved after believing for years that he no longer deserved a peaceful life. Marlowe eventually stopped calling Everett Dad in moments of confusion and began using the name with intention. Celeste never forced it. Everett never demanded it. It became something that grew naturally from trust, patience, and countless ordinary afternoons. Their family was not perfect. They still carried scars, memories, and difficult days. But they had learned that a family was not always defined by blood or wealth. Sometimes it was defined by the person who stayed when leaving would have been easier. Just before the sun began to lower over the city, Celeste stood beside Everett and watched Marlowe laughing with a group of children. She realized that her daughter had never really chosen a janitor over her billionaire mother. She had chosen kindness over status, safety over appearances, and a wounded man who understood her pain over a world that kept telling her she should hide it. And Everett, the former Navy SEAL who had once believed his only purpose was surviving, finally discovered something greater than survival. He discovered home. Before we end this story, leave a meaningful comment and tell us what you believe the greatest lesson is. Is family created by blood, or by the people who choose to stay, protect, forgive, and love us when we need them most? If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because sometimes the person everyone overlooks is carrying the greatest story of courage, and sometimes the second chance we are afraid to give someone becomes the very thing that saves us all.